Welcome everyone. My name is Gabrielle Schad. I'm happy to see you tonight for our second art talk in the ZHdK Department Fine Arts Art Talk series. Tonight I welcome my guest, Lorenza Longhi. Lorenza has been a visiting lecturer in the Master Fine Arts program, and my colleagues and myself, the whole staff, is really happy that she agreed to share tonight with us about her practice. As always, I'm giving a few remarks before we start with Lorenza's talk. As you've probably seen, this meeting is recorded. It will be put online in our YouTube library, so you can share the link with your friends who couldn't attend today. But please make also sure that you slip under the radar if you don't want to be part of this recording. We will have a look at Lorenza's practice for the next 40-45 minutes, and then we're really happy if you join discussion. You bring forward your questions. You can type it into the chat, or also tell me to unmute you and appear on the screen, or I will read your questions to Lorenza, or she has a look at them herself. I will also probably come up with a few remarks. So before we start with Lorenza's short bio, I'd also like to point out the next talk already and do a little advertisement. It's going to be Deborah Joyce Holman on 4th of May. Also a visiting faculty in the Master Fine Arts program of our school. So please make sure to save that date as well. Lorenza Longhi is born in 1991 in Lecco, and she lives in Zurich. She studied at the Brera Academy of Fine Arts in Milan and at ECAL in Lausanne. She has exhibited widely throughout Europe, and some of you might remember very well her solo show recently at the Kunsthalle Zürich last year, but then also at the gallery Weiss Falk in Basel, Bungalow, Berlin, Fanta-MLN, Milan and Plymouth Rock in Zurich. Her works have been included in group exhibitions at Fondazione Prada, Venice, Kunsthalle Zürich, Quadriennale di Roma, in Rome, Villa Vassilieff, Paris, Milieu, Bern, Fondazione Sandretto Re Rebaudengo in Torino. In Milan, she was a co-founder of Armada, running from 2014 to 2018. And she teaches regularly, as mentioned, at the Master Fine Arts program in Zurich. In 2020, she's won 2 awards, the Shizuko Yoshikawa Advanced Award for Young Women Artists and the Swiss Emerging Artists Prize from Société Générale. In 2021, she was artist in residence at the Swiss Institute in New York. So thank you, Lorenza, for being with us, and we're looking very much forward to everything you would like to share with us tonight.
Hello, hi everyone. Thank you, Gabrielle, for introducing the talk, and yeah, for also thanks to you and Judith for inviting me for this. And yes, I thought on how to structure this talk, and I think we can start. I would like to start presenting some of my works and exhibition projects, starting from the past and coming to the present day, so we can see together how things have developed. And I thought it could be interesting to start from back in the days somehow. And so I will share with you my my screen. yes, and I will use, do you see it? Yes, yes. I will use my website as kind of, yeah, the way to go. So I would start with the project I did in 2018. That was for my diploma. As Gabrielle mentioned, I did a Master Fine Arts at ECAL in Lausanne. And for my diploma, like everybody else, I had to realize a project or something, and this what what I presented. It was a group of works consisting of 4 silkscreen paintings, a sculpture that is the one in the center that is a handmade version of a USM Haller piece of furniture. And it's not really visible in this picture, but there is also a piece of cardboard attached to the wall that's called business card. And of this diploma, I only have this picture somehow because yeah, that's what is available right now. And somehow these works are constant in my practice also today. So that's why I decided to show it where everything somehow started. So when I was at the master, I started working using silkscreen as a technique. And from then on, I kept working with it and finding somehow new ways of developing it and adapting to the needs. And in this case, the words portrayed were from some 1950s advertisement I found on an American magazine called Life magazine. And I was very much interested in how the words sounded, and they were when they were detached from their context. And the USM Haller sculpture, when I moved to Switzerland in 2016, I found these objects that were all over the school and not only. So for me, this was a way to understanding the context I was put in. Like I moved from Italy to Switzerland in 2016. And so by doing these works, I tried to, it was a way for me to understand the new context where I was living. And so I realized these objects that, let me see if there's another picture here. Yes, more in detail, that are hand welded using stainless steel, and then this honeycomb cardboard that I found in the school as leftover or in the trash to replace the panels. And yeah, this is a better view of the silk screen. With this technique, I don't use I somehow readapted it myself, and I just use a blank screen, and then I cut out some stickers that I attached to the fabric. And thanks to this, every piece is somehow a unique piece, and all the marks and signs that you see, it's part of how things are produced, because they're very much made by hand, and so the traces of the work are very visible. And if you see here, also the framing system is somehow arranged and made up, so it's everything but perfect. But somehow I find it always interesting to adopt certain rules, like the framing and everything else, but making them myself and see what happens when these two things are together. So after this, I wanted to show you this project which happened in ZHdK. I was invited to take part in a group show in a space called Nest that now I think Gabrielle is running. At the time, it was Gabriele Caravaglia and Ilaria Vinci who run it. And for this exhibition, they plan to use the tables that were present in the school. And so I thought to directly print on them, the silkscreen print. And so they were somehow really part of the room, as if they could have been there since forever. And as you can see also here, the silkscreen is very much materic, and I always like to use the wrong ingredients, let's say, so to use ink on a table, and then you never know what comes out. So I'm interested in how things can develop by trying new things every time. And yeah, we can jump into the future in 2019. And I wanted to show you another project that I did in Zurich that continued my research about USM color sculptures. And it was an exhibition I did at Plymouth Rock, which is a space in Viedicum. No, I don't know. And it's run by Mitchell Anderson. So he invited me to do this show. And the space itself is a very particular space because it has no windows, and it looks very much like a weird windowless office or something. So having these three sculptures in it created a really weird environment, but it was interesting. And I also changed one of the two lights, the neon lights. So one was, you can see here, where it was a warm white, while this other one was a cold white to enhance this weird presence in the space. And this other piece was again belonging to office world somehow. It's a display where usually it's outside of offices or rooms, and you put the information about what's the function of the room. And I so it's bended because I took it away from a wall and then reinstalled it in the exhibition. So it's while the USM are handmade sculptures, this other object is somehow more of a ready-made that was sculpted by the action of removing it from a place. So there were these two elements in the exhibition. And again, maybe here you can see a bit better how these OSM are realized because they're hand welded. And I like to work with myself and using techniques and approaching them, trying to get the best out of what I can do. And so there, as you can see here, in the detailed picture, the quality and the work is always very visible, and yeah, it's a good clash with the original object. I developed this. I thought the combination of the USM and paintings was somehow working because often in reality, in like lobbies or in banks or anything, like any places like this, it's very common to find these two objects combined, like a USM that brings a lot of institutionality or to a place, and then a painting just hanging behind it. So it was something I was trying to explore also in when I had to do a show or something like this, to combine these two myself. And here it's another two piece of silk screen. All the silk screens are on nylon fabric, and also the nylon fabrics are somehow found. And as you can see in the detail picture, there is a weird stitching, and that's because it's some leftovers fabric that they are sold for cheap because they have imperfections, and I like to use these kind of materials that have some signs of the previous life and try to integrate them with my production in a way, or my interventions. We go to 2020. And I would like to show you another iteration of the tables that I first realized for the exhibition at Nest. And this time they were shown at Milieu in Bern. And it was again a group show with different artists. And in this case, the tables were not present in the space, but we decided to use this work also as a platform for Gabriele Garavaglia's performance. So somehow the tables, even if they were not functional in the exhibition space as they were in the school, became a platform for someone else's performance. And that was somehow interesting. And so these were the tables with the silk screen, and then they hosted this performance by Gabriele Garavaglia, and then there was other artists showing. And I also realized for this show some neon works, which is the neons that you can see on the wall, and that work is titled Improve Accuracies. And for this work, I at first I wanted to remake an industrial neon, but it seemed to be an impossible task, because the neon that we use in everywhere, the mixture of gas is kept secret by the factories. So in this case, I used some broken neons and re-welded them together, and then the mixture of gas in that are put inside is somehow guessed by the artisan who realized them. So it's interesting that this object that looks from far away again looks like a real neon. Then it is very when you get closer to it, you realize that something had happened, and because of this guessed mixture of gas, the lifespan of this neon is not really predictable. It's not as you would buy a normal neon and then it lasts forever, or you know exactly the shade of white that it emanates. It's just a guess. And so they were shown in a row, and each of them produced a different light. And eventually during the opening or just right after, they stopped working. So I was interested in this as an object that you expect to have certain standards instead was so vulnerable and open to new possibilities. And that was something I was interested in with this work. And I don't know if you have questions or anything, feel free to start asking me, or if you want to ask later. Another project that it's a bit different from these ones, it's something that happened in 2020. So somehow it was supposed to be before the pandemic, but then it was switched to October 2020. I don't remember very well, but it was a very long and complicated process, as we all experienced. And I was invited to do a group show in Rome. It's called Quadriennale. It's an exhibition that happens every 4 years, and it includes a lot of artists, and it's in a palazzo in Rome. And for this edition, the curators decided to change the space and make it trying to cover a bit the architecture of the palazzo. So they covered all the walls with some dry walls, like leaving the screws visible. And for this intervention, I realized some new works, but I want to show you the virtual tour of the exhibition. So yes, it's more clear. So as you can see here, the walls with the screws, that was a decision of the curators. And I decided instead to install this work on the ceiling, which is called Untitled. And it is basically a plastic film and a series of cables that lower the ceiling of the exhibition space to the height of 2 meters 10 or 2 meters 30 somehow. And it's based on it started by me observing the architecture of certain museums, especially and they usually have this kind of ceilings that are ideal for displaying artworks, and somehow are very elegant and everything. So I decided to realize this homemade somehow version of this using this cheap plastic film and cables and some tape. And so I installed this in this room where you can see the columns were already part of the architecture of the space. And funny, they are cut. Oh no, we went to another room. Sorry, they are cut in half, and so they somehow my intervention and clashes with the architecture and somehow doesn't pay homage to it, but it integrates the existing in a funny way. Another object that was present in my room and I decided to use are these couches that I later then showed at Kunsthalle Zürich, but here is where everything started. So when I went to visit the exhibition space, I noticed these weird, not so good looking couches. And they called my attention because they were such a present object and so weird somehow. And the curators didn't want to keep them in the exhibition because as I mentioned, they planned this restyling of this exhibition design for the show, trying to tone down these palazzo vibes the building had. So I asked them to keep these couches, and I did some silk screen and on fabric, and then covered some slice of the couches. And 2 of them were around my room, and one was in another part of the museum, so that the visitors could somehow encounter them by going around the show, the exhibition. And yeah, this one was another work. It was made by using some office curtains that I found on the street, and I stretched them on a wooden panel. So you can see the shades because they were used. So a part of it was dirty because it was used for regularly. And so by stretching it, also this piece, it's made with the same material. So you can see the effect these curtains make. And again, I'm interested in using materials that belong to other spaces and are discarded, and then taking them and reusing them in my artworks. And then there is a collage here. So with Quadriennale, it's more or less it. So we can go now to 2021. And I wanted to talk about two artworks that I did somehow during the pandemic, because of course I work a lot with I don't know, welding, printing. So of course the conditions of production changed during these years. So when I found I was lucky to have a studio at home, so I could somehow keep producing things. But at the same time, I couldn't maybe go to workshops or access other means of production. So I realized this series of collage that then I installed on this plastic pavilion made of plastic sheets. And it's funny because I saw this structure at ZHdK, and it was the tables that are at the entrance, the long wooden tables. At one point, these sort of dividers were installed so that different people could use the tables without really facing each other. So I was working on this collage series using all the advertisements of lipsticks and makeup, and I had to decide how to display them for a group show. So I saw this object that was in the school, and I thought it could have been an interesting display for this collage. So, and you can see them here. Again, another material I had at home with me were a collection of old magazines. Do magazine, it's a Swiss magazine about art, architecture, and culture in general. So I had access to these, and I could realize this collage by, yeah. And this other one, it's also from the same. Maybe you can see better the structure, not really. But yeah, it's this hanging pavilion where these collage are hung on. And the frames of this collage are also handmade by using scraps of metal. And yeah, everything of this series is very much handmade. Another exhibition that took place somehow during 2021 in April was my show at Weiss Falk in Basel. And I also produced this show in my home studio. And here, yeah, when I decided how to deal with the space, because when I do some shows, it's always important for me to deal with the space and find a way to relate to it. There were these benches next to the window, so I decided to build some extra ones to place around the exhibition space. They would accompany the work somehow, and the result was like the whole exhibition looked like a bit weird waiting room or something, filled with these sitting objects and some paintings. So in the end, yeah, and also the first work shown here is took inspiration from a duty-free illustration that it's at the Zurich airport. So this idea of waiting and shopping somehow was central to this show. Also, the title was "Treat Yourself to a Break," which is the phrase that advertises the train restaurant, the Swiss train restaurants. And during, of course, 2020 and 21, the train restaurants were closed. So the advertisement was not really played by the train. So I was trying to connect to it somehow. And you can see there were all these benches going around the space and the paintings or wall pieces. Yeah. They all have to deal with advertisement again, and in this case I use some shoe paper, and when you buy or get a box of a shoe box, there's this paper that wraps around to protect the shoes, so I kept it and used it as material for these pieces. Yeah. And the last thing I thought to show you was the show at Kunsthalle Zürich that happened last year in June. Wait, I have prepared something else. I will share now my screen again. Can you see it? Oh, yes, yes. So the show at Kunsthalle Zürich this is the poster of the exhibition. And displayed on the poster already, there is some leftovers from the production of the pieces. When it was time to realize the design for the poster, I was not sure if an image would be, I would be interested in having an image. So we thought maybe just take a picture of the materials you have around and where connect to the production of the show. So yeah, it's like this image here. That's basically how the silkscreen pieces, paintings are produced. As I was mentioning before, I use this blank silkscreen frame, and then cutting out some stickers. And here is the pink image on the right is what then it's the leftover of the production. So that was really the first thing of the show, even not so visible. And with this show, obviously the space was really big, so I had to come up with how I wanted to treat such a big space. During the research, I came across a book about the Musée d'Orsay that was designed by Gaia Aulenti in the 80s in Paris. And she designed a hanging system for this exhibition, consisting of holes that were running all over the walls, and then some sticks to which the paintings were attached. So I took this idea and used it for this show. It's not really visible in the picture, but there are all holes that were running around the space, and then the paintings were displayed. And yeah, having this very closed and organized system of holes and sticks allowed me to be really free in how I displayed and hang the pieces on the walls, because there was this sort of grid or structure that kept all of them together. So I could play with this. And another thing that I was interested in, it was to create a sort of entrance to the exhibition. And that you can see on this picture, there is a sort of entrance box. And I am always interested in the space of lobbies, entrances of museums, but also residential buildings, because I think it's interesting architectural space that welcomes the people, and it usually shows off the prestige or the function of a building. So I thought it could be interesting to have an entrance to the room as well, to the exhibition, and yeah, and then entering the actual show. And these walls here were covered with some adhesive tape, and so they were kind of reflecting both maybe the viewer, the visitors, but also the artworks themselves and the space. So yeah, I think you can see some more images here of that. And also in this show, I wanted to present the couches that I started doing in Rome, but it was really hard to get the original ones for bureaucratic reasons. So these couches are a copy somehow produced by a company who makes TV sets. So the quality was very different. These are like a prop for these couches. But it was important for me to have this strange object traveling from a museum to another, and yeah, see what it could do to the space. It's a bit of the pieces and more details of the exhibition. These are some images that I took myself because I thought I wanted to render the materials and the angles more visible, because the official documentation, I always find them to be very flattering for the shows, but also they don't really transmit the feelings of a show sometimes. So I decided to take these extra pictures myself.
Lorenza, I think
yes,
it doesn't transport to the next slide or to the next image. Maybe you reshare your screen. Yeah.
Oh, yes. What would you like to? What was the last thing?
We saw the two chairs with the up, and then
okay. You missed. Oh, sorry. I think something happened. Let me see.
Maybe the next one.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I was showing a PDF that didn't really appeared. So these were some pictures taken in the studio while producing the show and the works. Yeah. Again, some leftovers and yeah. The thing I tried to show you before was this, the pictures I took myself of the show, to give a better view of materials and details. You can see here the adhesive tape on the wall that was creating this reflective pattern, and especially in the picture on the right, reflecting the things present in the show themselves. Yeah. Also here on the right. Well, I think
You're through?
Yes, no, it's somehow really strange to not see the faces of it's a strange dynamic that of the Zoom. I think.
Now we're back with you again, and have certainly plenty of questions thanks so much for this walk through the last few years, through your practice. And I think we gained a pretty clear idea how one led to the other, or then again feedbacked into something different. So as said previously, I invite everyone to join this discussion with your questions typed into the chat, or even join us with your voice. As usual, I bridge this gap before questions drop in with a few questions I have. And I would say you outlined in a very palpable way how you work with different infrastructures, be it institutional or corporate. You also talked a lot about material aspects, which is crucial when it comes to your art, since it really changes also the semantics through the use of, let's say, used materials, how they are put together, and then in kind of commenting on the image that they sort of reproduce or mimic. Maybe it is too basic a question, but where does this attraction to the world of the corporate realm, the institution, and also some like terms related to working conditions, but in a very, let's say, neoliberal sense of a business that came up from the late 80s or 80s up to the noughties. Where does this come from? How have you been lured or drawn into this world to kind of unpack it and turn it onto itself?
Yeah, thank you. I think it's somehow I started to think about this kind of realities and dynamics just because I was exposed to it. I think it's still very present. Also, even if we go to a museum or any art school or library or hospital, anything, it's a very organized place with its own rules, and so being exposed to this kind of architecture and dynamics can be intimidating or something. So for me, doing this kind of works, it's a way to understand how these things work, and yeah, trying to see enhance certain aspects or other, and mostly it's trying to understand how thing works, I think.
Mm-hmm. Now you told us a lot about found objects or found materials that somehow become part of your artwork and are integrated, and even techniques of mass production through that are somehow then becoming increasingly individual or specific again, even though repetition can also mean difference. But how do you find those materials? I mean, you told us about finding something in the dumpster on the street, but still you seem like hunting these specific materials as well.
Yeah, I don't know. Funnily enough, to find this kind of stuff in Switzerland, it's harder than, for example, anywhere in Italy, where I also grew up and lived. In Switzerland, it's much more easier to find them as soon as you are, I don't know, enrolled in a school or work somewhere, because you can access, for example, the trash bin of the schools or the museum or anything. so you can just go and or maybe ask if they have to throw away something. While in Italy, for example, it's simple. It's very simple. You just go on the street on trash day, and you just collect anything you find. While in here, it's funny that this haunting is much more related to the places you have proximity with for a reason or another.
Mm-hmm. I still invite everyone to ask their questions. I see a lot of people joining also from school, our students, and probably well beyond that. So please feel free to address your thoughts and questions to Lorenza, who has been generously sharing with us. Yeah, I mean, it's probably been one of the first times that for me, someone so openly also addressed the fact in which ways this pandemic has changed their practice of working. Of course, it has had an impact on all of us, and we kind of think it's obvious that it's somehow becoming a part of our everyday. Even doing those Zoom talks is eventually a result of the changed situation at the time. Yeah, is it something that you still, to a certain extent, also live through as a revelation of how you want to work, and is it something, the elements you introduced, like as pavilion-like constructions that you want to keep and reiterate well beyond this specific circumstances that gave birth to this?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if how it will be developed. For the moment, it was really out of something I was observing in real time or in real life. So it was a very immediate translation of these new conditions that were surrounding me, and also they were changing the architecture and display of places. I don't know how it will be developed, but it's important, always important for me to observe the context and see what's peculiar, and then trying to translate it or integrate it into what I do.
Mm-hmm. Now we have a question by Judith Welter. So please, Judith.
Hi, Lorenza, and thank you for the talk. I found one detail very interesting that you were talking about when you were describing how you made your own documentation of the show at Kunsthalle Zürich, because it's true that museum documentations are often very generous with the work, and of course it's the idea to show it the best way possible. And also, I mean, I know it from my position of being a curator, and then at some point you receive the images, and somehow, even though I always worked with very good photographers doing this very professionally, I was a little bit disappointed always looking at the images. It's never the way I wish to. And I thought it's, you were somehow, yeah, you're mentioning an important point, but then furthermore of that, I was also wondering of somehow how much do you see this as being part of your practice, or put it the other way around, how much are you interested in actually involving yourself also in this institutional structures of an exhibition? I just wanted to check, but now I was too quickly about to ask already if the Kunsthalle Zürich included this informal documentation, or if it's just the documentation you show, because of course this could be also something that could be part of your somehow practice to actually decide on this documentation partly.
Yes, I think this was the first, somehow it was the first time that I thought about taking these photos myself, because I worked so much for this show, and then I wanted it to be documented also further. And so I never really thought of of this documentation being integrated with the official, along the official one. But it's a very interesting question that could be for sure developed into something more. And yeah, somehow I'm very happy with the official documentation. It's just I feel it's very different from exactly what I had in mind, or how the feelings that the show had when you were in the space. Somehow it's this weird translation that sometimes doesn't work.
You've mentioned different design objects that you tear into your art and analyze your environment through that action. But still, let's stick a bit to those specific objects in the sense of there seems to be some kind of affection in many ways also for the objects you take up, be it this bulky furniture design by Gaia Olenti, as well as then the more functional hanging system that is part of the Musée d'Orsay display she developed. But then even going further to picking up the aesthetics or even the document of makeup advertisement, beyond analyzing those objects in their power they have to shape us in our behavior and as human beings in a bodily way. There seems to be still an attraction that goes beyond that. That is more, is it a fetish, or what is it that attracts you to those still very specific objects?
Mm-hmm. I think I don't really, it's a strange relationship. Of course, there is a moment of attraction, but then I would never want to own these kind of things that I use in or that I repurpose in my practice. So I don't think it's a fetish towards the object, but more recognizing, of course, the power it has, and acknowledging that it has a sort of all these objects are desirable, and but at the same time I try to take a bit of a distance, and in this sense, and I think something like this.
So maybe my question has been a little bit in the vein of Tatiana's question that we have in the chat, but adding on this, I think you already mentioned why you chose the USM as something that surrounded you a lot when coming to Switzerland.
I think it was also one of the first objects that I didn't know. I'm not a connoisseur of design history, or I was never interested in design very much. And so when I arrived, this object that I saw everywhere, because it's like Italian design is very specific. There is some, it looks luxurious, it looks precious, it looks, and it's clear if something belongs to the to a domestic sphere, or if something belongs to something more offices. While the USM, somehow for me, I was surprised by how present it is and how easily it melts into all these in the aspects of lives. And so that's why I chose it, because I understood it meant a lot because of this, because it was present in all the various fields of people's lives. And yeah, I was interested also that its preciousness was not really on display at first, because it looks a very basic object in a way, very desirable, but also very basic. It doesn't seem to be, it's not like marble or something like this. So that's why I was interested in it.
Yeah, I mean, this reiteration, adaptation of those false ready-mades somehow really exposes value systems or symbolic values that are then still specific to certain communities or even certain strata of the society. Maybe to understand a little more what fascinates you in terms of other artists working, because that's the second part of Tatiana's question. Which artists are you currently inspired by or looking into their work?
They always change. That's always a tricky question. Let me think. So lately I've been somehow in looking at the work of Lutz Bacher, who was always interesting for me, or yeah, I don't know, it's every month there is a new interest or something. I would say that Lutz Bacher is always an important figure for.
And in which sense? I think she's been one of the artists that was very particular about not adopting sort of handwriting or not be easy to label, and also finding specific forms of representing the artwork that go probably a little against the grain. What are you specifically fascinated by? When you
I find it always surprising, and I'm interested in how every project seems to be very different from the other and very surprising each time. Also very free, and I find that to be very special somehow. And
then even beyond that, there is some interest in your experience in New York, since there are probably other, again, differently coded environments that you encountered. So Simona is asking how the specific context of New York has been influencing your upcoming works in relation to this particular environment and the spaces you experienced there.
So when I was in New York, I tried to visit as many, for example, lobbies as I could, but again, due to the COVID, only people who worked in these buildings could access these buildings, so it was a bit hard to do it. But I could visit some that are called public plazas, and are this sort of public lobbies inside of buildings. So it's as if they were a square, so with public seating and stuff, but they are in private buildings, so those were accessible. And it was interesting for me also to see this weird public space that it's inside somehow. And each of them had different dynamics going on, and again, the architecture of each of them was very different, so that was for sure interesting for me. But also the city itself, with for example, there are lots of scaffoldings, and so it seemed, and the people seem to customize the city very much, so that was interesting also to observe the level, all the signs and the materials that built the city somehow, even unofficially. That was for sure. I don't know yet how it will influence my research, but for sure I collected some materials that I'm using and some references, but it's still, everything is still in process for now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which brings me back to the question of manufacturing, and it was obvious that DIY plays a big role in your practice. But then again, not everything has to be done by yourself, or as the TV company that produced the sitting furniture has proven. But still, how much do you also, are you intrigued and interested to learn new techniques and kind of do some even almost handcraft?
Yeah. I think I like to be very independent when I do my stuff. So I like that if I can learn how to do things, then I can do them how I want them to be. And I don't have to always ask for someone or have to go to a place. So I think that's the most important. And of course, if there are things I cannot really learn or do, then it's not a big deal to ask someone to produce or something. But I think I like to learn how to do things myself, because it's a way to be independent in the production. And then also it's more it is interesting to then it also brings to unexpected results sometimes, because you often, if you plan to do something, then you bring it to someone who realizes it, then you get it back and it's as you expected it. I'm always interested in discovery how it could be by making it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you kind of learn differently from the object from technique if you see into it. Then a question, I think, before we round off this talk by Duarte Perry, asking you about the Zurich art scene. How do you feel about, I guess, the Zurich art scene?
Well, it's friendly. I find it to be a very friendly scene, and it's interesting. There are many realities and many exhibition spaces and artists, so it's good to, there are a lot of exchanges, I think.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I would, for one last question, I would still offer the floor. Doesn't seem like it, but as you are in Zurich and sometimes also at our school, I hope there will many more possibilities and chances for encounter and conversation with you. But thanks so much, Lorenza, for generously sharing tonight.
Thank you.
And it was a pleasure to join you on this walk through your practice.
Well, thank you for listening and being patient and be here.
Thanks a lot, and looking forward to see you again, and looking forward to seeing everyone again at our next art talk on 4th of May with Deborah Joyce Holman. Have a very nice evening, everyone. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye. Bye.